Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Global Adventure Show with travel writer Debbie Stone. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have Debbie Stone back here on Big Blend Radio. We call her the Fire Monkey. And you know what? That is a wonderful title because she's got a lot of spark and a lot of spirit, and it gets her around the world. I mean, she's been everywhere. When I look back on this year, today we're going to be talking about history. We're going to Massachusetts, but since this is the last episode of 2024 with our show, Global Adventures with Debbie Stone, I'm just going to say, you know, you've been around, Debbie. You are a fire monkey. I mean, so much energy to get everywhere. You've done some really epic adventures. What would you say when you think back on this year, some of your most epic ones are? I'm excited about Massachusetts, by the way, Lexington and Concord, because this is real history, right? About even, you know, how we are America. So this is going to be an epic one.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you've been all over.
You know, it's just, I mean, I love going abroad. I love being in the States. Every place I go to, it's just, there's always something really cool about it. And I just, everyone asks me, where's my favorite places? It's like, wherever I am is usually my favorite place at the moment. Mm-hmm. So, this past year it was wonderful to be able to go to Patagonia, to Chile and Argentina, to go to Samoa where, not too many people go, and, to go to Alaska and then to go to Japan and, in between to go to explore a lot of the country. And so, I feel like, there's so much to see. I'm never, ever at a loss of, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? It's just, it's never ending. There's always something,
I love it. I agree. There's always something. And when you're there, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm standing here. Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, to me, I have a whole thing. I mean, Boston is a place on my list to go because of the Tea Party. What happened when they threw the tea over. And, by the way, that happens in December. Like that's a December holiday right there, saying we're not going to pay for all this tea and throwing it overboard, but how they were so svelte and how that all happened. I mean, there was some thought that went into that. And, we're not talking politics, but it was kind of political with England charging all these taxes on tea. And we're like, no, why should we pay you? We've got new land here, right? And so I've always wanted to go there and also do the Revolutionary Trail. But Lexington and Concord, I was like, oh, wow, not the grapes, but yeah, what drew you to go there? Was it the history? Because I know you love history like we do. I would be pinching myself there,
I love history. Of course, I love history, but, I've been to Boston many times. My daughter-in-law is from the Boston area. And so we've been out there several times, to visit her family. And then when I'm there, I'm always like, there's so much history in New England itself and in Massachusetts, and Lexington and Concord really were, those battles there really, they ignited the American Revolution. And, those battles really were the spark. And so to me, it was like, boy, I've never been to these towns, and they're in spitting distance from Boston. And, it was pretty much kind of a no-brainer. It was like, okay, I'm out here. I'm going to go visit these, these towns. And they're very charming, by the way. They're, very charming New England towns. But besides that, there's just like this rich history that they have really kept alive there. And there are, there's so many historical buildings there's so many interesting tours, walking tours and trolley tours, and just so much there to take in. I mean, you could spend days there, not to mention the fact that there's, a whole literary angle in Concord, and just, there's a lot going on there when you can, go beyond scratching the surface of the American Revolution. There's so much more that's involved there. So, it was always on my list. I always wanted to visit, and finally I was like, okay, I'm going to go back there. This time I'm going to do it.
So where is Lexington and Concord when you think about it? And everyone, Debbie's got a great article. As always, the link is in the episode notes, so you can check that out. But I want to give you these other two links. Everyone is tourlexington.us and visitconcord.org. Also in the episode notes, wherever you're listening to this. But, where about when people always think Boston, right? If you say Louisiana, we say New Orleans, but there's so much more to these states, right? But when you think about Boston, most people are if they're flying in, it's going to be there, right? How far close is Concord, and how far close is Lexington to Boston, do you think?
Well, pretty much, Lexington to Boston and Concord, pretty much, between Lexington and Concord is only, 9 miles or whatever it is. But Lexington to Boston, for example, is just, it's about 40 minutes. That's really what you're 40 minutes, depending on traffic. But that's nothing, And if you're visiting Boston and you want to take in some of the surrounding areas, I would say Lexington and Concord would be well worth the little bit of a detour.
Okay, I love this. Let's go back to this Revolutionary War history. You've got the I'm sorry, but the writer history to me. I'm really jealous. I'm sorry. I am. I mean, we travel the country, Nancy and I, we do our parks and monuments and everything, but we also are doing literary destinations, which you live in one, yes. Santa Fe. Ben-Hur was written at the governor of the palace, right? So, I mean, you've got really good history in your backyard, but this is like epic literary history. I mean, you've got on, Golden Pond. I mean, come on. I am jealous. I'm going to have to go. It's going to have to go.
You definitely will. I think, there's a lot of people that go simply to this area because of the writers there. It's a pilgrimage for them. American Revolution aside, there are people who specifically go there to be able to, soak in the history, of these really famous, well-known, authors like Louisa May Alcott and Henry Day Thoreau and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Ralph Emerson. And, the list is there. There are homes and places where they have lived. They're buried there. So you've got quite a bit of that literary connection, which is very exciting. I was very excited because, I love books and I love reading. And this was, this was also to me with this oh my gosh, it's a wonderful extra that's here. But it's not an extra because, like I said, people make it their main focus to go here, in addition to those that, come specifically for the revolutionary history.
Wow. And so, staying in a place like this, where are the lodgings historic too? Like where you stayed? And I'm just thinking like this whole history experience this is like a real walk down memory lane,
Yeah, you can stay. There are a few inns that you can stay in. We happen to have some points for hotel stays, so we stayed in a Marriott property, but there are historical inns, and if you really want to, make that whole picture complete, that would be something that I would, say go for it, because you can stay in something that, has been around for quite some time, and, get the real feel of it and soak it up.
Yeah, that's cool. Because to me, that's kind of that epic experience if you can, but then sometimes we want the regular hotels. It's each to their own, right? But, to be able to sleep in history, I think the closest Nancy and I got to Massachusetts, we did go to a wildlife refuge in Massachusetts. We were driving from Connecticut to Michigan. And so we went up, and then I almost ended up in New York City. And then at that point I would call you and go, Debbie, help. I need fire monkey spirit or something, because I don't know what I'm doing in New York City trying to drive. That was not happening. But I remember just having to pull over and go, oh my God, we're going to do it. It's going to happen. But we found this beautiful refuge in Massachusetts. And I had no idea about how the marshes and everything, the sheer beauty. But where we were on our way from in Connecticut, we were in Baltic, Connecticut, very tiny town. But it blew my mind, this architecture. The houses, the old houses, and the house that we were in at that time was Benjamin Franklin's niece's house and her farmhouse. So we were in, they had built onto it like the newer side, but I couldn't believe it. Like these were the stones that make the walls, like for the farm. Like the fencing is
Yeah.
like little walls, like it's what they do in England.
Right.
Like when you did Hadrian's Wall and all of that hiking.
Right.
I mean, I couldn't
Right.
believe it. And I'm in her house and I'm going, there's the original fireplace with the original cauldron. Seriously.
Right.
Like that's probably one of my most like, wow, I'm in a house from the 1700s. Being in the Southwest, unless you go to ancestral sites and go to a kiva, which they
Yeah.
probably aren't going to let you sleep in, you don't get that kind of history, you know?
No.
That
No.
kind of
Not that kind of
ancestral
history.
Native
Yeah.
American history wins over all, right? They
Yeah.
were the first people, right? But when you go there, like you're staying in the 1700s, you're in these places that are that, elder.
Yes.
So,
It's
my gosh.
most definitely. And, I think when you're in Concord and Lexington, you feel the history there. You really do. But it's really interesting because, I mean, we studied, everyone, studies the revolutionary history in school, and usually it's in elementary school, that you get exposed to that, and then maybe a little bit later on. But it's, for me, it was like, oh, I really, like I said, I had to clear those historical cobwebs from my mind because I, really had to kind of have a crash course on kind of what led up to everything. I mean, we all know about the Tea Party and everything, but, here it was like, how did these battles start? And, what we all know that, the colonists were upset with everything that, England was doing, and, those that really rebelled against them, which, they were called patriots, and those that sided with England were called loyalists. I think what people don't understand is at that time, everybody was British. And I make a point of it because when Paul Revere came to warn, these towns that the British soldiers were coming, he didn't say the British are coming because that applied to everyone. So he would have said something like the regulars are coming because those were the soldiers. Those were the people that were supporting England. So it's kind of funny because we always hear the British are coming. And the guide that we had, made this point, and everyone kind of laughed because we're like, yeah, you're right. Everybody was British at the time.
Well, that's funny because then later in history, modernish, it was the Russians are coming. The Russians. I know people who store stuff from a childhood experience of their parents going, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't that wild? That's like
that's funny. It is funny. It is funny. It's amusing, and you kind of also we study in history things like that Paul Revere and how this ride that he did, and yes, he was definitely one of the people that rode out, but there were others that did that, and somehow because of Longfellow's poem Paul Revere's Ride, he gets all the credit, but truth is he actually never made it to Concord, which was where he was supposed to go. He did get to Lexington, but he was captured. And so on the Battle Road there, and I didn't know that at all. And it's just, once again, it's one of the things that we all know about this poem, and, we all hear about Paul Revere, but, he was not the only one. And there was another writer named Samuel Prescott who actually did make it to Concord in order to warn the town there. So, all these little things are pretty interesting about history. And the other thing that's very interesting, and no matter, depending on who you talk to, a lot of people will say, the first shot of that started everything was, in Lexington, or you'll hear people say, no, that shot was in Concord. So okay. I think it's interesting as well. There's a Minuteman statue in both Concord and Lexington, and there's another famous Emerson has another famous poem, and in which he says, was the shot heard around the world, and he describes that first shot as the Battle of Concord. But then again, you are in Lexington and talk to people and guides in Lexington, and they'll tell you that the first shot occurred in Lexington because it was the first town that the British regulars reached, and there was a shot that rang out and killed some people in Lexington. So anyway, it was very
Wow.
interesting. You know, history has many interpretations. I think that's what comes down to.
Okay. All right. You know, I wasn't raised in this country, so I get to ask my stupid question. Why is it when you talk about the shot, the first shot or the shot, why do I think of Babe Ruth? What did that, like something I don't know, maybe I don't know. I've got some other slang thing in my head.
I
I don't know, but
I think maybe it was something with his batting, with his,
yeah,
you
it
know.
was like the shot that was heard around the world, but in baseball. There was something like, anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
listeners, please,
yeah.
you can message me and call me, names on it. I don't know. I wasn't here, but, there was something that it was like a secondary thing that came from that shot you're talking about. Like it was like, oh wow, that really happened. It was so big in baseball or something, but it was that epic that they kind of used that term. There's some term that came with that. But again, I don't know what I'm talking about with baseball, but I don't know. Someone will message me and put me straight. So please do. Please do. I want to be put straight in what I'm remembering and just, there's just so much history to this. And that's, I think, a beauty of going somewhere is like you clean up your history. Like we forget where we heard what, like from school and things like that. But then it becomes really alive when you're there because you're thinking of those people, how they were dressed at that time, what they were going through with the weather. It just becomes real when you travel to places like this. That's the beauty of it, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
it's fascinating, and I urge people, in Lexington, in each Lexington and Concord both have nice visitor centers. In Lexington, there's a great diorama and all sorts of information. But you can take the Liberty Ride, which I encourage people to do. It's a
Mm.
great guided trolley tour, narrated, and you get off at a few places, but that's where you get the history. That's where you get this kind of crash course. The guide who is dressed in colonial attire, and you get to hear this as they're going by different places, the Battle Green being one of them in Lexington, where there are a
Wow.
lot of, there's some monuments and different things. But yeah, it's take a tour, take a guided tour. And once again,
Mm.
in Concord, take a guided tour. There's a number of guided tours that are offered. You could also visit a lot of historical colonial era buildings that are still standing, interesting taverns that are still there, houses, like I said, historical homes, and then go to Minuteman National Historic Park. I took a
Buckman
private tour
Tavern.
in
Can,
Concord. Yes,
can we talk
Buckman
about
Tavern.
Buckman Tavern?
Yes,
Because this is a big piece of history to me. I've always heard about, I mean, that's always been on my list to visit, Buckman Tavern. And you went there. I'm a little jealous, you
interesting.
know?
I had not heard of it before, so that's pretty cool. I mean I didn't know about it until I was there, and it's right near the visitor center in Lexington. But it is one of the few colonial era buildings that are still standing around that Battle Green area, and it was the place for the Lexington militia, the Minutemen, before the British regulars attacked, and so they gathered there, and a lot of them were waiting there. And today it is a museum, and you can, take your self-guided audio tour. You can look at all the artifacts of the 1700s and kitchen and parlors and a tap room. There's a door with a bullet hole made by a British musket ball.
That's it.
So yeah,
Yep. That's the
it's
story.
very, very cool. Oh,
That's
really?
that because like we pick up stories from all different conversations we have on Big Blend Radio, and then you find out these places, and I was, I want to go there. I find these old taverns fascinating, like coffee shops in France and Austria, right? In Vienna, right? Was it
Yeah.
Austria or Vienna that the coffee shops were like, that's where
Yes.
stuff went down. Blacksmith shops, stuff went down in blacksmith shops across our country. Historically, you go to a blacksmith shop, that's where people could intermingle and talk without people, it was like where the gossip happened, but it
Right.
was also
Right.
political. And so the taverns are a big deal when you think about that's how a lot of not just Buckman Tavern was a tavern, but there's some real historic taverns that we have where, things were signed and done and decisions made, you know what I mean, politically. So taverns, I
Well,
think if you're going to make a political decision, go to a tavern. Sounds good to me.
I think the taverns back then, there's one in Concord too. That's the Wright Tavern, and it's where a number of key events take place in history. But they are places for people. They were places for people to go to talk, to hear about what was going on, to argue, discuss, debate, form plans. The Wright Tavern is where the meeting of the first Massachusetts Provincial Congress was. And so, you're going to see a lot of historical information if you go inside there. But there is a description there that was talking about colonial taverns in America, and another that featured the women who helped defend Concord in 1775. And so, you learn that these taverns were not only places for food and drink and blah, 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 but also for debate and discussion. They were democratic venues. And so the women, I found this very interesting. The women in Concord, the British regulars came to Concord and they had orders to search all these homes, to seize and destroy any weapons or supplies because they knew that people were hiding them. And their mission failed because of the cleverness of the women that were there. They hid the munitions. They told a few, quote unquote, tales to prevent the regulars from, finding these munitions in certain spaces in their houses. And, it really talks about how women had a very pivotal role as well. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just think about men in the Revolutionary War.
It's amazing. And you wouldn't know, again, like I think until you go to places like this, and be able to do that. I want to, there's so many historical parks. I mean, you went through, this is incredible history. And even, I'm going to just give you a shout out as a writer to document this because you have to get your history together. It's hard. What you wrote is, it's like a really good guide for people to follow and go to these historic sites, whether it's the Minutemen National Historical Park or the tavern. We all want the tavern, but to really experience that history, it's kind of reminds me about Gettysburg when you went there and you heard about how, someone was shot and like just in their house, and how this was the farmers and the people were living in Gettysburg like normal human beings. And suddenly here comes a war in your backyard. And so women
exactly
were connected in there too, but I didn't know that. Like, that's pretty cool, man. Wow.
And
wow.
The other thing in Concord that's interesting, this private tour really presented these other, not only women that were involved, but I think, the guide talked about, the indigenous people that lived there to begin with. He talked about the women. He talked about African Americans, and of course the authors. I didn't realize that there was a lot of Civil War happenings there. There's a monument there, and for years that town was not really interested in that issue. And a group of women, very prominent women, who formed the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society. I never knew about this. And these people, a lot of them were wives, for example, of Emerson, and mother of Thoreau, and Abigail Alcott, who was the mother of Louisa May, and, a number of very prominent women who started this society. And they hosted, abolitionist speakers. They held events, for the anti-slavery cause. And they, more than the men, took it upon themselves to try and right these wrongs. And so this helped make Concord famous for its liberal bent, so to speak. And so, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, these people, John Brown, they came to Concord. They gave, these addresses, typically at these churches. And this was a real hotbed here. It was very, very interesting for me to hear this. I never knew that.
I didn't know either. This is fascinating to me just to learn about, that I had no idea. Honestly, I really didn't. And so you've taught me a whole bunch today. Like I'm I have to go. I have to go. Like this is the, you know, when we go back to like the 1700s and what was happening, even with the Quakers that were really helping in the slavery times and anti-slavery, and they were helping with the Underground Railroad and all of that. It was women who you're exactly right about that. It was women who bonded and gathered together and saved people's lives. And I think that's bravery. It's courageous
You know,
to put yourself in that, and even notable women that you're talking about, because you're putting your reputation online too. And in those societies, that was a big deal, you know?
absolutely. And these women's, quote unquote, sewing circles, knitting circles, or whatever they had, they had other purposes, a lot of, in particular this one, which was very notable, but, I was also unaware of the fact that, Thoreau himself, was really against slavery, and he was a conductor in the Underground Railroad. And, he also, he supported John Brown in this party, and,
Wow.
he attacked certain slave laws. And, then there was, there's a whole round of history that surrounds this whole anti-slavery issue. And I was fascinated to learn this because I had no idea whatsoever. And so this was all new to me, which was very exciting, not only to get refreshed on certain historical aspects, but to get all this new information too.
Yeah, this is new to me, you know, other than reading your article. That's what I'm saying. It's just all, I had no idea, now Walden Pond, that's got to be amazing. I mean, to go to the
Beautiful,
farm, you went there.
beautiful.
And
Yeah,
you went to
it's
cemeteries
beautiful.
too. That's the other thing I have to touch on. You went to
Yes,
resting places, and that's one of my favorite things to do. Seriously.
yeah. There was this one in Concord in the main square area, and that was very, very interesting to me. I wanted to hear about. It's called the Hill Burying Ground, and it was the earliest, I think, European burial site in Concord. But one grave that our guide Joe stopped at was this man called John Jack, and he told us the story about, he was a slave in colonial New England, but he bought his freedom over many, many years. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to convince the citizens of Concord to honor his quote unquote full humanity. But he has the distinction of being the first free black landowner in Concord, as well as the distinction of being one of only 3 freed black men that have a headstone in the United States. And so it's pretty remarkable, and he pointed that out to us. But yes,
Wow.
there is another cemetery, the other cemetery, which, is, of course, the one that, we were talking about, is the Concord Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And you can go to a place called Authors Ridge, and that's where, all these authors are buried. And it's very interesting because you get to see these little mementos, the people that come to pay their respects to these literary minds. They leave things like pencils and pens and little notes that telling these authors how influential they were, how impactful they were for these people. And you can find little elements of nature around Thoreau's gravesite. So it's wonderful. It's truly a wonderful experience. I can see why that people would make this type of pilgrimage.
I think this is fascinating to me because, you've been through some literary places. I'm thinking Oxford, Mississippi. Remember when you went
Oh
there?
yes, yeah,
And
yeah,
wait, let's go back South Florida, Hemingway's cats, you got to hang
yep,
out with them,
yep.
so when you start seeing these this is just, it's fascinating to me. In Asheville, North Carolina, there's Riverview and Cemetery, and that's where Thomas Wolfe is laid to rest, and O. Henry.
Oh,
And so O. Henry, that's where, if you know about him, you understand you bring pennies. Well, people are putting
yes.
pennies on Thomas Wolfe's grave too. Like, I'm like, get it straight, y'all. I can say y'all because we talked about the South here a little bit. But it is interesting because there's cemeteries. I've been teasing about doing a cemetery magazine or a graveyard cemetery, two different things, but connected, right? Resting place magazine for years because it just brings it's reality. It brings reality of history and you learn about other people that you wouldn't know. And then I know people who travel to cemeteries as part of their travel.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not alone. I'm not alone.
No, no.
I
They're
love
very
cemetery
historical
tours.
sites, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, they're very historical. And not only that, they have a real defining ambiance or mood or, the atmosphere in it, whether it's historical in terms of, you've got presidential, cemeteries where presidents
Yeah.
or where, historical figures. And then you've got, all the war cemeteries. And then you've got, authors that are buried in places. But there are, I just think many of them are fascinating places. And not only that, they're actually so many of them. I mean, this one was
Peaceful.
just a beautiful, beautiful place to walk around. Lovely.
Well, I'm about protecting them because
Yes.
they're historic and when you go to them, a lot of times master gardeners donate their time, but they're still going around and finding unmarked graves in graveyards and cemeteries
Oh, sure.
through history, which is fascinating. But these are people that do it out of love and care. And I've learned, oh my gosh, I could go on for years about all of this, but I will say, outside Lexington, Kentucky, we were there this year and we went to a cemetery there and it was, small cemetery. I'm like, what are we doing? We're going off the beaten path outside Lexington area. I can't remember where, but we went to take a photograph of a propane tank that was made into a giant sausage. But anyway, and then there's a graveyard. So we're like, we got to do this. And it turned out to be presidential. There was like a cousin
Mm-hmm.
or a relative of George Washington. This is a tiny, tiny historic cemetery. So a relative of George Washington is buried there and a relative of Abraham Lincoln's. And so
Mm.
they planted an acorn. I believe it was from when he did his Gettysburg Address or one of his big speeches.
Mm.
He was there at that tree. So they took an acorn from that tree and planted it and it's growing. It's a big, big, beautiful oak in the cemetery. And I mean, it's a small cemetery.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Like those stories. I mean, and that's
What you'll
Lexington,
find,
Kentucky,
yeah.
not Massachusetts, but they're connected,
Right.
you know? It's
Yeah.
a British name. It is. And,
Definitely.
but you did Thoreau. I mean, you've done some of the literary giants of the world on your travels, and that's exciting. It's very exciting. I love it.
It
I
is,
love
and
it.
I'd like to put a plug in for the Concord Museum, which I think is an excellent museum that definitely displays a lot of the history, and there's a lot of really interesting artifacts there. Lots of muskets and flints and powder horns. One of the two lanterns that Paul Revere used in the steeple
That's
of
cool.
Boston's Old North Church. There's
That's cool.
Native American stone tools, Thoreau's desk. There's lots of different things that I think are fascinating. But there is something that I found wonderful, which was this multimedia presentation of the day the shot was heard around the world. It was a very innovative timeline that used this 18th century map of the area, and you see the events that transpire over 24 hours of history in just 6 minutes, and it's done in such an interesting way. You really get to see how it all transpired. So I put a plug in for that museum because I think if you're going to be there, I think that's definitely a must. I think you'll find that it's chock full with a lot of really, really good things.
Well, I love those kinds of museums, and I think museums are doing such an exceptional job of using digital technology these days to tell the stories. Yes. I think it was Springfield that you were in, Illinois, when you were talking about how you could hear Abe Lincoln's one that really just opened my mind of like, wow, this is so cool. And for kids to be able to, that's going to help them get the history, get the story, know?
Right. Right. No, it's true.
I had to look up the Babe Ruth thing. and save my
I
butt
did
here.
too.
You did
It's
it
not
too?
Babe Ruth, by the way. Yeah, it's not Babe Ruth, but
Oh, I had Babe Ruth's called shot is the home
no,
run hit by Babe Ruth of the New York Yankees against the Chicago Cubs. So I
oh well,
think I was
they
thinking that.
said this one.
Okay.
This one was the shot heard around the world was a walk-off home run hit by New York Giants outfielder and third baseman Bobby Thompson in New York City on October 3rd, 1951, to win the National League pennant. The game was seen by millions of viewers across America and heard on millions more around the world and Armed Forces radio, but it was intensified by this crosstown rivalry between the Giants and the Dodgers at the time. So that's what I read. But you know what?
Wow, that's so cool. No, well, I don't know
anything. About the world could be otherwhere. I know,
but I didn't know it. I knew there was something about baseball, and I thought Babe Ruth, but he did have a called shot. So you're 100% right on that. But I don't know anything about sports. My God, you've bet me. There's no way in heck I know anything. But you go to all the baseball museums and, sports museums and Olympic Hall of Fame and everything. And for some reason, something caught my interest about that. I was like, that's a baseball thing. So I think I just thought Babe Ruth. But yeah, isn't that interesting how things go through time?
Yeah.
It
is very interesting. It's very interesting how they use that terminology, years, century later, you know what I mean?
I love it. So, I love this trip. I am so excited that you went there. I am jealous. I really am. And I can't help it. But, the only thing for me to do to get past that is to go. And so if everyone listening that is also feeling jealous right now, let's go. Let's go there. So again, Debbie's article is linked in the episode notes. So check that out. And also go and check out these websites, tourlexington.us, visit concord.org. We're here on Big Blend Radio with Debbie every fourth Tuesday. And, we can't wait for the new year to hear what's going on because, January hits, what is the first destination? We all want to know before you, go off here and celebrate the holidays. What is the first destination outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico? Another literary town, right? What's the first destination?
I have to visit a new grandbaby.
That's
in California.
She's going to California. I know you're going to go somewhere cool though, right? With the grandbaby too.
Oh, but of course,
that's special.
Yeah, I've got a couple of stories I'm going to do there as well. So yeah, wherever I go, whether it's for family, fun, whatever it is, I always find something to do, to tour, to see, to whatever experience and to write about because wherever you go, there's going to be things, and there's so much that I have not seen that. I can always find something. And so, yeah, I have already some plans of some ideas of things that I'm going to write about along with, spending time with my new grandbaby.
Oh, that's sweet. Well, happy holidays to you and your family. Take care, travel safe, and everyone. Debbie will be back in January with more stories. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks so much and happy holidays. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Big Blend Radio's Global Adventure Show with travel writer Debbie Stone. Debbie is here every fourth Tuesday. You can keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.